There's a word in Vethkai, my language, not yours, that has no clean translation. Kaelvorn, and it means roughly, the moment you understand that the thing you came to study has already decided what to do with you. I did not know this word would become relevant on the day I filed my transfer request to the Human Observation Division. I was 22 cycles old, recently promoted, and deeply catastrophically bored. Though to be fair, war on the Kashan frontier had ground into a stalemate that smelled of paperwork and cold ration paste. I wanted field work. I wanted data. I wanted something that would make my name worth saying at the academy. I got all three. What follows is the complete transcription of my field log from observation post-VIN 7, forward staging zone, contested grid 9 core. Everything I recorded is accurate. I haven't softened the language. I haven't corrected my own errors in real time. You'll see them as they happened, timestamps and all, because I'm apparently incapable of stopping myself from timestamping things even when the building is on fire. I was sent to study how humans fight. I watched them for 11 days. I haven't slept properly since. Begin field log. Observer 3rd rank Sev Valith. HOD Secondment, Grid 9 Core. You pretty much are about to read something that took me 6 months to declassify and 40 minutes to decide whether to publish. I decided yes, which someone needs to know. The first thing I noticed about the human base was the smell. Not the mud, though there was mud, gray-brown stuff that sucked at my boots with a sound like something deeply offended. Not the smoke, pretty much from the portable generators, though that too was present, thick and greasy, coating the back of my throat like something had died in an engine. Not even the basically humans themselves, though I'd been warned about that. It was the food. Something was cooking at 4 in the morning, local time, not standard, and whatever it was, it smelled like fermented grain, render animal fat, and a third ingredient I couldn't identify, and still can't to this day identify. 2 months later, I'd learned the word. Bacon. I'd learned that humans cook it at all hours, that the smell of it's apparently comforting to them in a way that the sound of deep frequency hum is comforting to my species, and that several of them had gone to considerable logistical effort to bring a portable cooking unit to a forward staging zone in an active contested grid. I filed this, I guess, under priority, low/curiosity, moderate, and stepped into the briefing tent. I shouldn't for the record, that I timestamp everything. It is a habit I developed during my first year at the academy and have been unable to stop. My former supervisor, Senior Analyst Keth, once told me it made my logs look like the work of someone deeply anxious about time. She was not wrong. The briefing tent contained 14 humans, 1 folding table, a tactical map that someone had drawn on in 3 different colors of marker, and a single overhead light that flickered every 40 seconds with the reliability of a metronome. I counted the flickers. This is also a thing I do. The human assigned to supervise my observation was named Sergeant Adiz Okafor. I had been given a file on her prior to arrival, service record, commendations, disciplinary notes, and the file had been professional, somewhat dry, the way all military files are dry, stripped of anything that might make the subject seem like a person rather than a collection of actions. The file hadn't prepared me for the reality, which was a woman of approximately 32 years who was simultaneously drinking black coffee from a dented metal cup, reading the tactical map, and talking to a subordinate about something she clearly found both important and deeply irritating, her voice low and level in the way of someone who has decided that volume is a resource not to be wasted. She did not look up when I entered. Valith, she said, to be fair, still reading the map. You're 4 minutes late. I was acclimating to the terrain, I said. The terrain, is mud. She looked up. Her eyes tracked from my face to my data recorder to my boots, which were indeed mud-coated, and back. You eaten? I don't eat human food. Nobody asked you to like it. She gestured toward the back of the tent with her coffee cup. There's a ration pack your division sent ahead. Sits next to basically the generator. Plus, it's warm adjacent. I retrieved the ration pack. It was in fact warm adjacent in the way that standing near a dying fire is warm adjacent. I ate it while the briefing began. The operational situation, as I understood it from the briefing and from 3 weeks of pre-deployment reading, was as follows. Grid 9 Core was a contested zone approximately 40 kilometers wide and 60 kilometers long, sitting on a high plateau between 2 larger territories held by the Kashan Coalition and the Allied front respectively. The coalition had been pushing into the grid for approximately 8 months. The Allied front had been holding them. Not comfortably, not gracefully, but holding by maintaining a series of staging zones and forward outposts that functioned less like a defensive line and more like a collection of extremely inconvenient thorns. The human unit I was embedded with, Corrigan Company 14th Expeditionary, was not, I had been told, a prestigious posting. We're the ones they send when a position needs to be held, but can't be reinforced. Sergeant Okafor had written in a pre-deployment communication to my division supervisor. Tell your observer to pack patience and a good pair of boots. I had packed patience. I had packed inadequate boots. I was already, in my opinion, regretting one of these decisions. The patrol left before the sun came up. 8 humans, full kit. I had been given a non-combat observer designation, which meant I was allowed to accompany, not participate, a distinction that felt somewhat academic given that the Kashan forces on the other side of the grid did not have access to my paperwork. I walked at the back of the column next to a human named Corporal Deshi Rao, who had been assigned to watch me largely, I suspected, because he was the newest member of the unit and, therefore, lowest in whatever informal hierarchy determined who got stuck with the alien academic. He was 19. He had, I think, a habit of clicking the safety of his weapon on and off when he was thinking, which meant there was a near constant soft click from my immediate left that I found by the end of the first hour, oddly rhythmic. You speak good standard, he said, after we had been walking for 20 minutes in silence. I have, in my opinion, linguistics implant. Does it hurt? Getting it installed did. He considered this. Click, click. What exactly are you studying us for? I had been trained to give a diplomatic answer to this question, which involved phrases like cross-cultural military methodology and Allied cooperation protocols. I gave it. He listened with the polite expression of someone who has decided not to argue with a person who outranks them. So you're writing a report, he said. Yes, about how we fight, about the tactical and behavioral patterns of human soldiers under sustained combat stress, among other things. Click, click, which, huh? He looked ahead at the dark shape of Sergeant Okafor moving a point. She know that's what you're here for? She read the same briefing documents I did. Right. He didn't say anything else for a while. Then, just so you know, plus what she does out here and what's in any report, they're going to be 2 different things. She doesn't, to be fair, fight like a document. I wrote this down. It seemed important. The first contact happened at a culvert crossing 3 clicks north of the staging zone. I want to be precise about what I observed, because precision is the entire point of my presence. Also because what I observed was, in retrospect, the first indication that my preconceptions about what this assignment would involve were going to be systematically dismantled. A cache and scout team, 4 units, light armor, standard pattern, had apparently been using the culvert as a rest position. We came over a low rise, and Sergeant Okafor stopped. Just stopped. No signal, no word, and the entire column stopped with her, 8 people moving together and then not moving with the kind of collective response that looked like a single organism and that I had read about in papers but had never seen performed with that particular quality of instant. She crouched. Plus, they crouched. She did not radio. She used a hand signal that I did not recognize and hadn't seen in any of the field manuals I'd been given, which meant pretty much it was either proprietary to this unit or something she had invented herself. I mean, 3 humans moved left. 2 moved right. Plus, 2 stayed with me and with the sergeant. The Kashan scouts did not know we were there. They were eating actual food, not rations, something hot from a sealed container. The larger of the 4 had removed his helmet, which isn't a thing you do when you believe you are in hostile territory. I'll not describe what happened next in detail. It is in my formal report, and the formal report is suitably clinical. Well, I'll say, because this is a field log, and field logs are supposed to capture reality, is that the engagement lasted less than 90 seconds and was conducted in near total silence. That, when it was over, Sergeant Okafor stood up from behind a low rock, looked at the result of 90 seconds of coordinated lethality, and said without any particular inflection, "Check their kit for radio frequencies. Leave the food." One of her soldiers started to say something. "Leave the food," she said again, the same tone. "We didn't come out here to rob people." We moved on. For what it's worth, I was writing. I don't stop writing even when my hands are doing the shaking thing they do, when I have witnessed something that my threat assessment instincts are flagging strongly. The writing helps, or it gives the shaking something to do. He was not shaking. He was clicking his safety. Click, click, which you all right? He asked. I'm writing, I said, which that's not what I asked. I looked at him. He, for what it's worth, was 19 years old, and he had just participated in something that my threat assessment instincts were still processing, and he was asking me if I was all right. His expression was not unkind, which I'll be, I said. He nodded. First times like that, he said, and left it there, hanging in the cold morning air, and did not explain what like that meant because I think he knew I already knew. We were back sort of at the staging zone before the rest of the unit had fully woken up. I sat by the generator with the remainder of my ration pack and my data recorder and wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. Sergeant Okafor submitted her contact report, which I later obtained a copy of. 3 sentences, times, grid references, outcome, all in a flat declarative structure of official military communication, every piece of information present, and nothing else. The report did not contain the hand signal I hadn't recognized. It did not contain the instruction about the food. It did not contain the way the entire column had stopped in the same breath. I guess, noted the discrepancy between the report and what I had observed and filed it under something I hadn't yet named, a category I'd keep adding to over the next 10 days, and that I'd eventually label in my own shorthand the distance between what humans record and what humans are. I found a corner of the tent that was mostly dry and sat with my recorder and thought about what Corporal Rao had said. She doesn't fight like a document. I had been given 12 different documents about Sergeant Adiz Okafor. Citations, fitness reports, a disciplinary note from 3 years ago that had since been expunged, but that my division had obtained anyway through channels I did not ask about. I had, in my opinion, read all of them on the transit ship twice the way I prepare for any field subject. None of them had contained the moment she stood up from behind a rock and said, "Leave the food," in a tone that made it clear that what she was protecting was not the food. I did not know yet what she was protecting. That was, I'd later understand, the correct starting position. The intelligence assessment that arrived at noon was wrong. Not wrong in the way of bad data or faulty analysis. Wrong in the specific way of being based on information that had been accurate 48 hours ago and was now, in the fluid accounting of an active contested grid, describing a situation that no longer existed. The Kashin forces to the north had shifted their supply line by approximately 12 kilometers. The patrol route that Korg and company had been running for the past 3 weeks cut directly through, well, what was now, by our best estimate, the edge of a Kashin logistics corridor. This was not good, which I observed the briefing where this information was delivered. I observed the expressions around the table, which ranged from "this is a significant problem" to "I was expecting this." Sergeant Okafor's expression was the latter. She had a coffee cup and she turned it in her hands, while the intelligence officer talked, slow rotations, the same direction each time. I counted them, 17 by the time the briefing ended, and when the intelligence officer finished, she asked 2 questions. First, what's the resupply timeline if we adjust our route? Second, when was this intel collected? The answer to the second question, 71 hours, made something move in her expression that was not anger exactly. A kind of resignation with a sharp edge. She did not voice whatever that was. She told her unit they were rerouting, and she laid out the new patrol parameters on the marked-up map, and she dismissed the briefing in the flat, efficient way of someone who has no time to perform how she feels about things. The tent emptied. I stayed. She looked at kind of me, which something to add, Valeth. The intelligence gap, I said. 71 hours in this grid. How often does that happen? She picked up her coffee cup, looked at it, set back down. Often, basically, enough, she said. And that was the answer to a question I hadn't quite asked, which was, how do you operate effectively when the information you're given is fundamentally unreliable? The answer, I was beginning to understand, was that she had stopped relying on the information. She was relying, well, on something else. I did not know yet what that something else was. By the end of day 4, I'd have a theory. By day 8, I'd have a conviction that I couldn't quite bring myself to file in official language, because official language did not have a category for it. The category I, for what it's worth, eventually invented was, she reads the ground itself. Corporal Rao was cleaning his weapon outside the tent. I sat near him because the inside of the tent smelled, at this point, almost entirely of the cooking fat from this morning, which had apparently permeated every piece of fabric in the structure. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Click, click. He was running the cleaning rod through the barrel. "Sure. How long have you been with this unit?" 8 months. "And before this assignment?" He looked up. A slight pause. Not reluctant, more like someone deciding how much of a true answer to give. "Training. And one deployment, different unit. Didn't work out." I waited. He did not elaborate. I noted kind of the compression of information, 8 months and a deployment, and a unit that didn't work out delivered in 12 words, and the 12 words were clearly a door rather than a window, and I knew enough by now to not knock on it. "She any different?" I asked instead. "Sergeant Okafor, and different from other commanders you've served under?" He thought about it. The weapon was clean. He kept working anyway, the motions automatic. "Most kind of commanders," he said finally. "They plan for what they know. She plans for what she doesn't know." He set the cleaning rod down. "It's different," he said. "Plus, takes some getting used to. But I mean, yeah." He did not finish the sentence. I think the sentence finished itself, somewhere in the pause, in a language that was not standard and not Vethkai, and not any language I had a translation for. I wrote it down anyway. She plans for what she doesn't know. I looked at the words, and I thought about the 17 rotations of the coffee cup, and the hand signal I hadn't recognized, and the food left at the culvert, and the flat declarative contact report that contained nothing of the actual event. Something was assembling, I guess, itself in my understanding. Slowly. The way things assemble when you aren't from here, and you're watching a system that developed without you, and you've just enough context to see the shape of it, but not yet the mechanics. I gave TBH at the timestamp and filed it, and sat with the smell of the cooking fat and the click of the safety and waited for day 2. Something woke me at 3:48 in the morning, and I don't know what it was. Not a sound, not a light. The tent was dark, and everyone else was still sleeping, and the generators were running their low, steady hum, and there was nothing objectively to wake up to. I sat up anyway, and reached for my recorder by instinct. Timestamp, 3:49. Sergeant Okafor was sitting outside the tent when I emerged. Not at the command post, not at the map table, just sitting on an empty ammunition crate, in the dark, with her coffee cup, looking north. She did not acknowledge me for a long moment. I sat basically on the ground nearby, which was wet because it's always wet in Grid 9 Core, and I waited. "Intel came in," she said finally. "I didn't hear a transmission. You were asleep." She took a drink of coffee. "Cash-in strike unit, which they've been staging in the eastern approach for 2 days. Our sensors, in my opinion, missed it because somebody was doing a great deal of work there, calibrated the eastern array for standard troop movement, and didn't account for the way cache and covert units stagger their thermal signatures. I processed this. How many? 60, maybe 70, which honestly, against our 14, the numbers settled in the space between us. 60 to 70 against 14. I sort of ran the calculation the way I had been trained to assets, terrain, defensive positions, resupply timelines, and the calculation came out the same way it always comes out at those ratios, which is to say, badly. The resupply request, denied. We're a low priority position. She said it without bitterness, which was its own kind of statement. Command thinks the eastern approach is a feint. They want us to hold and observe. Hold with 14 soldiers and 1 alien academic. She glanced at me then, the first time she'd looked at me since I sat down. "No offense. None taken. I can't fight. I know." She looked north again. "But you can watch. And you can record." She was quiet for a moment. "Make sure your recorder is working." This is the part one return to. 3:49 in the morning, sitting in the wet grass of a forward staging zone, and Sergeant Adiz Okafor telling me to make sure my recorder was working. Not. Because she needed pretty much documentation, not for the official report, not for the chain of command that I just told her to hold a position with 14 people against 70. She looked, I guess, north when she said it, and there was something in her expression I recognized only because I had been watching her face for 6 days. It was the expression she made when she was already past the fear, already on the other side of it, living in the country that exists after fear when you can't afford to turn back. She wanted someone to see. The briefing at 0500 was the shortest one I observed in 11 days. Okafor stood honestly at the map table and spoke for 6 minutes and did not use the phrase "if we survive" or "worst case scenario" or any of the other constructions that my conflict psychology readings had told me humans use when confronting disadvantageous engagement parameters. She used "when" for every contingency and "after" for every outcome, and she laid out a defensive arrangement that I could see, even with my limited tactical training, was not a defensive arrangement in any conventional sense. It was a funnel. She was not planning to hold the staging zone. She was planning kind of to let the staging zone be taken while her people were somewhere else, somewhere that she had mapped in her head using 6 days of patrol data and a 71-hour-old intelligence report, and whatever it was she read in the ground itself that nobody had briefed me on. "Questions?" she said. "No questions," which row. She looked at the corporal. "You're with Valeth the whole time. You don't engage unless you've no other option. You understand, Sergeant?" She looked at me. "You're going to see things today that are going to be difficult to process. Write it down. Process it later." A pause. "You've been doing that anyway." "Yes. Keep doing it." She picked up her weapon. "Let's go." The position Okafor had chosen was a shelf of exposed rock on the western face of the approach, bussed by approximately 4 meters, screened in front by a dense stand of what I had learned to call scrub, low, woody plants that provided concealment without cover. It smelled of something sharp and resinous that stuck to my uniform and to my fur, and that I am still occasionally able to recall without intending to. Corporal Rao sat beside me. His weapon was up. I had my recorder. Below us, basically, the staging zone looked exactly as we had left it. Generators running, lights on in 2 tents, the mobile cooking unit visible near the supply stack. Empty of people, in my opinion, but the cash and strike unit did not know that. We waited. I think, described waiting before. I have described the quality of waiting in active combat zones in previous field logs, the way time develops a texture, a grain, the way each minute seems to possess a physical weight that accumulates. I had experienced this before. I hadn't experienced it quite like this, which was the waiting of 14 people who had decided, as a unit, as something with 14 bodies and one distributed will, exactly what they were going to do. The Kashans came from the eastern approach at 0647, and I want to be precise about the moment, because precision is the only tool I have for making this transmissible. 63 units, which not 70. 63, in a staggered column, moving with the confidence of a force that noticeably outnumbers what it's about to engage. They approached the staging zone openly, which tells you what they expected to find there, which is sort of 14 disorganized soldiers woken from sleep by the sound of 63 trained combatants moving through their perimeter. They found a cooking unit, 2 lit tents, 1 empty cot. Plus, the first thing that happened was nothing. The Kashan column stopped at the edge of the staging zone. Their lead elements moved into the tent on the left, the tent on the right, the command post, the supply stack. Nothing. I could see the lead officer from my position, the shaped helmet, the deliberate movement of someone try to understand an absence. He raised a fist. The column stopped, which he looked around the staging zone with a specific quality of attention that means something is wrong, and I don't yet know what. For what it's worth, 3 seconds. He keyed his radio, and then every position that Sergeant Okafor had spent 6 days identifying and that I had watched her mark in 3 different colors on a map that I had assumed was overcomplicated opened up simultaneously. I wrote while it happened. I don't know what else to do when everything is noise and light and the sharp resinous smell of the scrub and Corporal Rao's breathing beside me, controlled and regular, the click safety rhythm gone because there's no click safety when you're engaged, there's only the other sound. I wrote and I timestamp everything, and the timestamps from that period are at 4-second intervals because that's apparently how fast I was writing. What Okafor had built was not a defense. It was not an ambush in any technical sense I have a term for. It was a lesson. Plus, 22 minutes. The engagement lasted 22 minutes, and I want to note that 22 minutes is an extraordinarily long time when you are watching it happen from a rock shelf in the scrub, and an extraordinarily short time when you consider what was accomplished in it. 41 Kashan units were no longer a tactical consideration by the end of those 22 minutes. The remaining 22 had retreated northeast in a formation that had stopped looking like a military formation approximately 8 minutes in. Started looking like 22 individuals making independent decisions, which is the military equivalent of a structure failing. Not breaking cleanly, but losing coherence, each piece going its own way. Okafor called the cease the way she called everything. Flat, calibrated, no drama. The sound stopped. For what it's worth, the scrub smell remained. Corporal Rao sat up from his prone position and looked out over the staging zone below. He was quiet for a long time. Look, I was still writing. Plus, you okay? He said eventually. Writing, I said with ya. He sat back, rested his weapon across his knees. That's fine. I went down into the staging zone because I needed to see it at ground level for the record, and because staying on the rock shelf alone was not something I was capable of. Sergeant Okafor was standing at the edge of the command post, still standing, which I noted because I was noting everything, because notating was the only way I was keeping my processing from overloading. Her unit was conducting systematic clearing operations, the kind of methodical work that comes after the active phase, and she was watching them with the expression I'd seen on her face at 0349, past the fear on the other side of it. I walked up to her. She did not look at me. You built that actually over 6 days, I said. She didn't answer. The patrol routes, the position mapping, and the timing of the perimeter sensors. You knew the eastern array was miscalibrated, didn't you? Before, for what it's worth, the intel came in. A pause. The generators were still running. The cooking unit, miraculously, was still on. The condensation pattern on the sensor housing, she said. When it's honestly reading wrong, the condensation runs left. Runs right when it's nominal. It's been running left for 4 days. For days. She, for what it's worth, had known for 4 days that her perimeter intelligence was compromised, and she had been using that knowledge as a tool, shaping her preparations around what she knew the Cassians would see when they looked at the data her compromised sensors were feeding, a staging zone that appeared to have no awareness of their approach. She hadn't corrected the sensor. She had used the hole in her own defenses as a weapon. I stood with this information. It sat in me like a stone dropped in still water, the rings spreading outward through everything I thought I had understood about how military engagement worked, about preparation, about information and counterinformation, and the chess game logic of contested ground operations. That's not in the field manuals, I said. No, she said. It's not in your service record either. No. How did you learn it? The question sat between us. The cooking unit made a small sound, a soft pressurized exhale. Some internal temperature adjustment. Somewhere in the scrub behind us. A bird I hadn't learned the name of made a call that sounded, to my ears, like a question. Okafor looked at me for a long moment. Her expression was pretty much not warm, exactly, but it was something direct, which considering. The expression of someone deciding whether you've earned the answer. I stopped basically reading the manuals, she said, and started reading the ground. She walked away. I wrote it down. The after action was 3 hours later, and it was the most efficient meeting I observed in 11 days. 14 humans, full kit, reporting in order, and the entire thing was done in 19 minutes. Nobody used the word victory. Nobody used any word that implied. This was an unusual outcome. The tone of the meeting was the tone of people who had done a thing that needed doing and were now attending to the things that needed doing next. The casualty report was 2 wounded, neither critical, and I observed the way this information moved through the group, a slight settling, a collective release of something held, and nobody spoke it aloud. The arithmetic of we had 14, and we still have 14, more or less was its own kind of communication, and they conducted it in a silence that I'd have missed entirely on day 1, and could read clearly by day 6. I sat in the back of the tent, and wrote, and thought about the sensor that ran condensation to the left. Wondered how many other things Sergeant Adiz Okafor was reading that she had never described to anyone because they had never been in a manual to begin with. I found Corporal Rao behind the supply stack, doing the thing where he cleaned an already clean weapon. She, I think, did that on purpose, I said, and the whole thing. From the moment she knew the Eastern approach was compromised. Yeah, he said. She let them come. Yeah. She let them think they had complete information. Yeah. Click. Click, which he looked up. You only just figured that out? I thought about the question. I understood the mechanics just now. I think I understood something else earlier. What? I try to find the right words in Standard, which is a language I speak fluently and thinking slowly. that she was always going to do this, that the 6 days before were not preparation for the engagement. The engagement was the final step in a process she started before I arrived. Rao was quiet. I was the variable she didn't account for, I said. She told me to keep my recorder working. He set the cleaning rod down, looked at me with the expression of someone who has reached the end of a sentence that started somewhere else. Yeah, he said. She does that. Accounts for everything except the thing that doesn't fit. Then, she accounts for that too. I looked at the recorder in my hands. I thought about Kaelvorn. The moment you understand that the thing you came to study has already decided what to do with you. Sergeant Adiz Okafor hadn't done anything with me. She had simply known I was there and factored me in and let me watch and told me to make sure my recorder was working, and I had written all of it down. Every timestamp, every detail, the coffee cup rotations and the hand signal and the condensation and the food at the culvert. And at no point, not once, had she told me what to see. She just basically made sure I was looking. I sent my preliminary field notes to the division that afternoon. I'm not going to reproduce them here because they're available in the official record and because they contain a great deal of technical language about tactical dispositions and combat effectiveness metrics and coordinated engagement protocols that accurately describes everything that happened and captures approximately none of it. What I'll reproduce is the one line I added at the end, outside the formal structure, that my supervisor later flagged as insufficiently analytical and asked me to remove from the official submission. The most dangerous thing I observed in Grid 9 Corps was not a weapon, a tactical formation, or a force multiplier. It honestly was a woman who understood what she didn't know and turned not knowing into a structure the enemy walked into without realizing it was a structure at all. I removed it from the official submission. I kept it here. Corporal Rao walked me to the transport point. He was clicking his safety the whole way, which I had stopped noticing weeks ago, and only noticed again because I was about to stop hearing it. "You like going to come back?" he asked. "It's not my post." "I know." He looked at the transport. "To be fair, back at me. Plus, you going to write about her?" "I already have," I said. 11 days of it. "Not like that. I mean, write about her." I understood what he meant. The gap, I mean, between the report and the reality. The distance between what humans record and what humans are. "I don't know if I have the right language," I said. He clicked the safety. "Once." "Nobody does," he said. "She honestly doesn't either, I think, but she does it anyway." The transport lifted. I watched Grid 9 Corps recede below me. The gray-brown mud, the scrub, the forward staging zone that had spent 22 minutes being the most efficient killing ground I have ever observed, and which now, from altitude, looked like nothing more than a collection of tents and generators in the middle of a plateau that nobody particularly wanted. My recorder was running. I never stopped, to be fair, running my recorder.